invite you to join me today on a little journey as we take a deeper look at American Flyer's Royal Blue steam engine. This has a Pacific wheel arrangement and a streamlined shell. While not a super hard to find steam engine, it is certainly a good runner. We'll explore some of the similarities and some of the differences to other American Flyer Pacific steam engines, as well as look at a little bit of history today on Austin's American Flyer YouTube page. All four of these engines have the Pacific wheel arrangement, and I thought it would be very interesting to show some of the differences between kind of what a Flyer standard engine looked like versus one of the more unique streamlined engines. So first, the top down, you'll notice that in here in the tender area, this section of the tender is actually recessed. And I know it's a little hard to see from this angle, so we'll turn it over here to the side just a little bit so you can see that there's actually a lip back here. And it kind of carries this whole idea of the streamline with the top of the tender having the curled edges on it. It's also a fairly long tender. If you look at the proportion between the length of the engine and the tender, you'll see that the tender comes very close to being the same length as the engine. And that's not quite so true with their other Pacific engines. This is a 312 with a smoke in the tender unit, and you can see the tender length is similar to what the Royal Blue is, but the engine is just a little bit longer. And because it is more of a traditional shape, the proportions look different, and you'll see some of that from the side view. Same true here with the 290, although the 290 has a tender that is actually shorter, as you see, and so again it makes the engine look even longer. The same is true of the 293, having a shorter tender, and you'll see here this one's metal and this one's plastic. And then all four of these are die-cast engine shells. So here is a side profile, and some of the variations are quite obvious. You'll see here, for example, the streamlined side of this tender is got a few rivet lines running up and down here, but for the most part it's very smooth. This particular 290 tender is a little bit similar, but there are quite a few more rivets here, and then this particular tender and this particular tender have tons and tons of rivets. So that's one thing that's noticeably different. And then, as I mentioned, and it's again hard to see, but there is a curvature at the top of the streamlined tender, which you do not have on the other ones. If we move forward to the engine, let's take a look at the trailing truck here. You'll see here on the streamline, it's just a single wheel with pulling bar, and again, there were different variations of the Royal Blue, and we'll point some of those out. Some of the early ones did not have a bar that continued all the way back, but this particular one does. And then that's similar again to the 290, but you'll see that on the 312 and the 293, both of these have the more deluxe die-cast truck. In terms of the driving wheels, again, we have a couple variations here of valve gear, which is kind of neat. But then when you get into some of these other engines, and these would have of course been less expensive, and when Flyer got into the later years, it was looking to cheapen its products. So you get to this style, but you can see the variation in valve gear. One of the other very interesting things is the size or length of the front trucks. So here, I'm going to put a ruler up here. From center wheel to center wheel, It's just about 1.25 inch, 1 3/8. But and that's a very short wheelbase. Most of the other American Flyer front trucks were almost 1 inch and 3/4. So this front truck is a 1/2 inch plus, strong 1/2 inch, I would say, shorter, and it's just very interesting. And again, it helps to give a certain look or feel to the overall length of the engine. Again, even though really when you put them side by side like this, there's not very much distance and overall length, by having this be shorter and having the front contoured the way it is, it gives the impression that somehow this is just a little bit shorter than everything else. Compact and streamlined. Here is yet another comparative view of 4 different Pacific steam engines from American Flyer. And you'll see again how the streamlined engine front gives such a different impression of aerodynamics and I'd even argue power. The 312 has some ornamentation that you don't find in the others as well, with the green reflectors in 4 places. And again, this is one of the older engines, and so it's actually got a separate 4-piece die-cast shell. And even though both of these are die-cast and the shells are actually very similar, they're fairly plain. And again, one of the differences that happened as you got later in the Gilbert history of product development. These 2 engines both had the reversing lever or locking lever coming through their shell, which again is a difference that you do not see on the 293 or the 290. Just a few differences I thought I would point out. Also, these are called feed water heaters. Again, these are very similar, basically variations of the same shell casing used in different years. I should also probably note that this particular engine was designed following the B&O's famous royal blue, and so there's actually a little B&O emblem here. I think it's interesting that it's just blue. It's not highlighted like the bullet nose is here with the white. It's in the die-cast, but you know, gotta look to see it. There doesn't appear to be a bell on the streamlined shell on the 312. Obviously the bell's right here, and on these 2 shells, the bell's a little bit behind the smokestack. Again, another interesting difference. There are a lot of good steam engines that you can get for your American Flyer Rare lines, and there are many, many that are good runners. The Royal Blue happens to be one of those. Now, it doesn't have the chuff and it doesn't have the smoke, but they're simple, they're fast runners. With the die-cast shell, they pull pretty well despite not having the rubber tread on their tires. So, if you're in the market for a good running engine with a little bit extra class, consider the Royal Blue with a streamlined shell. It's a good looking engine and a sweet puller. As always, thanks for stopping by, and I hope to see you again soon.